Dr. Uche Najero Moji. I'm a researcher with the African Institute for Cybersecurity and Teleinformatics Governance. So I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in this symposium, and I want to say hi to everyone out there. So I'll be talking on. I'll be looking. My research looks at the governance of lethal autonomous weapon systems in Africa. So what are lethal autonomous weapon systems? These are weapons that that's activate on their own and target and eliminate targets. Of course, human beings. And of course, this is not the first time. Like with the development of AI, these weapons have become a kind of more precise and more deadly and more also prone to be used by non-state actors. So my research looks at the legal framework that could be applied in the African context to govern these weapons. Globally, there have been calls for these weapons to be banned or regulated. Of course, there are some countries that ask for it to be banned outrightly. Some countries ask for it to be regulated, while some countries ask for it for some kind of a timeline for it for regulations to come into place. So my research uses the trinomial methodology to look at existing African regional treaties on non-aggression. You know, African countries have been have had treaties on non-aggression where they made pass not to fight against themselves, not to go to war against themselves. So at the African Union, have the African Union part on non-aggression. At the ECOWAS level, we have the ECOWAS protocol on non-aggression. In the South African region, you have the South African protocol on defense. And in the East African region, you also have the Eastern African non-aggression pact. So I'm trying to look at these treaties, even though some of them were established before the AI, before discussions on AI started. So, but I'm trying to look at them, the technology, the definitions of aggression and hostility under those treaties, whether they can be applied with to regulate lethal autonomous weapon systems. So, what are lethal autonomous systems? These are weapons that can select and apply force targets without human intervention. And after initial activation or launch by a person, the weapon self-initiates or triggers a strike in response to information received through sensors. This is how the International Red Cross Society defines autonomous weapon systems. And I made several definitions of this. I went through several definitions of lethal autonomous weapon systems. And the basic characteristics I found out was that these are weapons that are able or have the ability to independently execute attacks or critical functions such as identifying or tracking or eliminating targets. So there are a lot of definitions actually, but these are just like the basic, or maybe what's the normal or the basic criteria that goes through the definitions. So of course the origins of lethal autonomous weapon systems have been for some as far back as the early 18th century, where they were used during the Russo and Japanese War. Of course, they were not AI enabled at that time, but these were like in form of naval mines. So naval mines were laid on the coast of Japan, and of course, some of the mines also drifted and went to China and caused a lot of havoc there, and this led to calls for international calls for regulating the lethal autonomous weapon systems. Now, the basic criteria of those weapons at that time was that they could activate. So once they were struck by a ship, they will activate and then sink that ship. And of course, they not only sank enemy ships, they sank civilian ships that were neutral in the war. So now, modern autonomous weapon systems include a range of platforms, including unmanned aerial vehicles, ground robots, naval drones, which are equipped with sensors, artificial intelligence algorithms, which allow them to operate independently. So, of course, lethal autonomous weapon systems are they are cheap. There are a lot of advantages that are accrued to them that can make them kind of let's say attractive. So one of them is that, of course, they are cheaper to deploy. So a state that has a small population can deploy lethal autonomous weapon systems to increase its force capabilities. So in that regard, it's seen as a force multiplier. Now, of course, they are not like humans. They don't require rest, maybe just a battery recharge and all that. So they don't require salaries, and they can be lost in operation without any need for a burial, unlike human soldiers. So they have a lot of advantages. And again, they don't expose human beings to they don't expose humans to kind of some dangerous situations. For example, when soldiers want to go on reconnaissance, so they may have to go into enemy territory. And in that regard, in that instance, they could as well be lost or captured. So, but as for unmanned systems, they could go into those territories without being even if they are harmed, there will not be any kind of report back to the family or to pay condolence to the family that lost a soldier and all that. So that makes it advantageous. So, but there are also disadvantages that come with these weapon systems. One is that there are a lot of when they are linked to AI and digital systems, there are cyber security risks are involved. For example, they could be hacked into, and then when they're hacked into, they could perform instructions that were not authorized by the maker or the person who deployed them. Right. So since they are linked to AI, since they are connected to AI, they also face the same cyber security risks that other digital platforms face. Then again, you have the critical issue, which is that machines are now making life and death decisions. And now that brings it like, is it ethical? Is it ethical? So, and then again, there's a challenge that rogue states and even terrorist organizations can acquire these weapons and then deploy them against innocent civilians. So generally, of course, globally, about 30 countries have asked for it to be banned. 125 countries have called for a treaty, and then in Africa, these weapons have been deployed massively, and there have been lots of deaths. Now, the first instance where they were deployed and they caused a lot of havoc was in 2020 when they were deployed in the Libyan civil war, and now. They were deployed. The equipment that was deployed was a drone that was made by the Turkish by Turkey, and they were used by the Libyan government against some rebels. And of course, it was seen that it was seen globally as the first test of killer robots being used in combat. And then that raises challenges again. Whether Africa is now a testing ground for other countries who have developed these weapons to test them and see the efficacy. And of course, there's a probability, there's a lot of probability in that because it's possible that the proxy wars can go on in Africa. So, but generally, between 2011 and 2024, reports indicate that there were over 900 drone attacks in Africa. These drone attacks include drones that that drop grenades on the targets. And then from these drone attacks, it's recorded in 15 African countries, where 15 African countries were affected, and then 943 civilians were killed in Africa as well as drone attacks. And then between 2021 and November 2024, again, there were also attacks that where a lot of civilians were lost, including in Nigeria and all that. So, and then recently we have seen that these weapons have been deployed by terrorist groups in Africa. For example, the ISWAP deployed drones that were manned, that were improvised with grenades to attack positions of Nigerian military somewhere in the northeast in sometime late last year, and that led to lots of deaths. So now civilians in many countries in Africa where there's conflicts now live in fear of they no longer live in fear of armed groups, but they live in fear that the sky has become a source of fear because they don't know when death will reign. Because these drones being equipped with weapons are now now used to drop to attack civilians and other targets. So now, which African regional treaties could apply to lethal autonomous weapon systems? So I began by looking at the ECOWAS Protocol on Non-Aggression, which was adopted in 1978. Now that protocol commits all member states not to commit aggression or hostility against each other. Now it says it classifies
you have 1 minute.
It doesn't define hostility or aggression. But however, okay, it doesn't classify hostility or aggression, but it says that it classifies any weapon prohibits members from using any weapon against each other or to commit aggression against each other. Then again, you have a similar provision in the Standard Protocol on Defense and Security Cooperation. Any weapon, and in that case, it even goes ahead to describe what hostility is and all that. Then you also have a similar provision in the Non-Aggression Pact of the Great Lakes region. So my argument is that, and you also have a similar provision in the African Union Non-Aggression and Common Defense Pact. So my argument is that this pending the establishment of new treaties on lethal non-autonomous weapon systems, that this can be interpreted, because the African Union and the African Human Rights Commission has been making resolutions that demanding for new treaties or new binding laws on lethal autonomous weapons. But then again, we know how it is to make laws in Africa. For example, the Malabo Convention was adopted in 2014. It took almost 10 years for it to go into force. So do we need a similar? Do we have to go through a similar route again? So my argument is that African countries can also broadly interpret the existing non-aggression treaties and take out the provisions that talk about any weapon hostility, and then interpret them to include attacks by using lethal autonomous weapon systems. Thank you so much.